today's video, I'm going to show you how to make some of the best buttermilk biscuits ever. But first, let's whip up a quick and delicious batch of blackberry and ginger preserve to go with them. Alright, grab a sauce pot for the preserves and add 454 grams or 1 pound of fresh blackberries. Follow that up with 15 grams, a half ounce, or an even tablespoon of freshly grated ginger. If you don't have a microplane, mincing works well too, or you could just add a knob to the pot. It'll impart a more mild ginger flavor, but your preserves will still be tasty. Next, add 50 grams, 1 3/4 ounces, or a quarter cup of light brown sugar and an equal measurement of white granulated sugar. Finish things off with a hefty squeeze of fresh lemon juice. Now, I'm ballparking about 15 grams, a half ounce, or 1 tablespoon here. Lemon juice is really important because it lowers the pH, allowing the pectin to activate, which is going to help set the preserves. Now grab that sauce pot and bring it over to your stove. Place it over medium heat and use a whisk or some other type of kitchen utensil to mash up the blackberries a bit. They'll soften up and break down a bit as they cook, but it's nice to give them a head start. Reduce the heat and simmer the preserves for about 15 minutes. Give it a stir here and there just so it doesn't burn on the bottom of the pot, and a great way to check doneness is to use the plate test. Once you think the preserves have thickened up enough, spoon a bit onto a chilled plate and then tilt it. If the preserves start to slide very slowly, you're in business. If they run all over the place, then continue cooking for a few more minutes. Now the blackberry and ginger preserves need time to cool down and set up. This little rest will also allow the flavors to mingle and develop a bit, and that's always a good thing. Instead of cooling everything down in the same pot, transfer the preserves to a bowl or another container and chill it in the refrigerator for about an hour, or until your biscuits are baked and ready to go. Now it's time to make the biscuits, so start by measuring out some flour. Anytime I make biscuits, I use White Lily Self-Rising Flour. It has a percentage of baking powder and salt included, and the flour is made from soft winter wheat, which is low in protein. This reduces the gluten formation and makes for a fluffier biscuit. If you can't get your hands on White Lily, check the video description box for other great options. Okay, add 360 grams, 12 2/3 ounces or 2.5 cups of unsifted flour to a large mixing bowl. Next, add 4 grams, an 1/8 ounce or a half teaspoon of fine sea salt. Then stir the mixture until the salt is evenly incorporated into the flour. Place the bowl in the fridge and chill it until all the other ingredients are prepped up. Okay, grab a separate, slightly smaller mixing bowl and measure out 310 grams, 11 ounces, or 1 cup, plus a tablespoon of buttermilk. You can use either whole or low-fat buttermilk here. Both provide great results. Now add 23 grams, or 3/4 of an ounce, or 1 tablespoon of honey. Now you don't need to use anything fancy here because we're cooking with it. Just basic clover honey will do. Dissolve the honey into the buttermilk by giving the mixture a quick stir. Then place the bowl in the fridge to chill. You'll notice a reoccurring theme here. It's really important to get all ingredients as cold as possible before making biscuit dough, and I'll explain why in a few minutes. Okay, for the next step, you'll need a frozen stick of butter and a box grater. Try not to tear the wax paper when unwrapping the butter, like I'm doing here, and leave it attached at the end so you have something that's not slick to hold on to. Use the coarse side of the box grater and grate 100 grams, 3.5 ounces, or 7 tablespoons of unsalted butter. Now go easy here because box graters are infamous at destroying knuckles if you're not careful. Now the butter has started to thaw out a bit, so transfer it into a bowl and drop it back into the freezer for about 10 minutes just to make sure it's totally frozen. In case you're wondering, I'm just weighing my initial volume measurement of butter out by weight. I like to weigh everything out when baking because the results are much more exact. Okay, grab the bowl of chilled flour and your frozen grated butter, then mix the two together. Use the larger bowl for this because you're going to need room when adding the liquid ingredients next. There's no need to overmix here, just move everything around in the bowl until the butter is evenly distributed throughout the flour and there's no clumps. Grab the buttermilk mixture from the fridge and pour it into the bowl with the flour and butter. Now gently mix and fold the ingredients together just until the dough is formed, nothing more. I mentioned earlier that it's important to keep everything super cold, and that's because it's vital that the butter stay frozen, or at least solid, until the biscuits hit the oven. Those little bits of butter in the dough, well, they help to create that tender and flaky texture we're after. Flatten the dough a little bit and shape it into a loose rectangle, but try not to work it too much with your hands. Body heat will soften up the butter, and remember, that's a no-no. So use a dough scraper, one of my favorite tools, yes, It's perfect for the situation. Grab the rolling pin and continue to flatten the dough out until it's about 3/4 of an inch to 2 centimeters thick. Use some of the flour if you need to keep the dough from sticking to the rolling pin. Chances are that will happen and it's totally fine. Reshape the dough back into a rectangle, this time making it a little bit more defined by squaring the corners. Then carefully fold the dough into thirds like a letter. This process is kind of like laminating the dough. It creates separate layers of those little bits of butter in the biscuits, which is another thing that helps create that flaky texture. Rotate the dough 90 degrees, then roll the dough out and back down to 3/4 of an inch thick. Repeat the process of squaring and folding and rotating, then rolling 2 more times for a total of 3 90-degree turns and 6 individual folds. Now, after the third turn, roll the dough out to a final thickness of 1 inch or 2.5 centimeters. Square up the corners 1 more time for good measure, then transfer the biscuit dough into a parchment-lined baking dish or on a small sheet pan and place it in the freezer for 30 minutes. Once the dough is cold and slightly firm to the touch, slide it onto a cutting board along with the parchment paper. Then drop the pan into an oven that's preheated to 475 degrees Fahrenheit or 246 degrees Celsius. Grab some extra flour and dust each side of your knife. This will help keep the knife and dough from sticking to each other, which will help you make cleaner cuts. Now, personally, I trim a little bit of dough off of each side just to get a nice straight edge, but you really don't have to do this. It's totally 100% optional. Oh, and yes, we're cutting these biscuits into squares, not rounds. This reduces the amount of scraps, which you'd have to re-roll to get the same yield if using a round biscuit cutter, and re-rolling dough never produces the same quality biscuit. Alright, make a cut lengthwise down the center of the dough. Don't pull the knife when cutting, just push straight down, then lift up and move on to the next cut. This way you don't seal the edges, which will keep your biscuits from rising to their full potential. Now, rotate the dough 90 degrees and make 2 perpendicular cuts to form 6 individual biscuits. Grab your pan from the oven, which should be blazing hot by now, then line it with parchment paper and carefully transfer the biscuits to the pan. You have to work really quickly here because the bottoms will start to cook immediately, and this means the butter is melting away, and you really want that to happen in the oven. The upside is that really cold dough, a hot pan, and a super hot oven will produce maximum steam in the biscuits, which will help boost the dough's rise while baking. Once the biscuits are ready to go, pop them in the oven on the middle rack and bake them for a solid 15 minutes. Now, in some ovens, the biscuits will brown too quickly, so at 10 minutes in, check on them and turn the temp down to 450 degrees or 232 degrees Celsius if necessary. When they're done, your buttermilk biscuits should look exactly like this. Golden brown with a beautifully flaky crust. And when you pull one open, the biscuit should be tender and fluffy inside. Spread some delicious, softened and salty butter on each piece and let it totally melt into the biscuit. Then grab that blackberry and ginger preserve that you prepared earlier and place a spoonful on each side. Well, I guess the only thing left to do now is tuck in.